how are you? Welcome on in.
Podcast by George.
Another podcast by George.
Podcast by George. Border to border. Coast to coast. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Our technology is working. And as everybody knows that follows my show, this is one of my most favorite segments because it gets me away from the news a little bit. My God, I was watching the House hearing yesterday. You talk about a house of mirrors that we're living in, and we'll get to this in another show when we talk more about politics. But Matt Taibbi, who's been on my show, one of the nation's leading independent journalist, one of the most liberal left-wing voices in media for decades, under attack by the Democrats in this House hearing. It was amazing. You've got these political things going on where the Republicans want to skewer the Democrats and the Biden administration because it's in office right now. And so they're wanting to attack anything that even looks like it could be supportive of Donald Trump. And so the Democrats are out after Matt Taibbi, and it's the Republicans that are defending the First Amendment and Taibbi's work and stuff. It's just bizarre. Check the news out on that, and we'll get to it probably next week with another speaker. But that's not what we're going to talk about today, folks. Today, we're going to talk about Captain John Cox. He's a veteran major airline corporate and general aviation pilot. Captain Cox has flown over 14,000 hours with over 10,000 in command of jet airliners. And additionally, he's flown as an instructor, a check pilot. We're going to talk about a check pilot situation here today, a test pilot, and that's in addition to his involvement in global air safety. Now, you may have read him because he authors the Ask the Captain column for USA Today. He served as the aviation analyst for NBC News. He's provided expertise to numerous other media outlets, including podcasts by George. You'll also see him on a couple of my favorite shows, Air Disasters and Why Planes Crash. God, I just love those things. He is the Chief Executive Officer, Safety Operating Systems, Washington, D.C., and he's got clients all over the world. So let's take that off the screen here, click a couple of buttons, and see if I can get him to come in on the live line today. I never know if it's going to work until it works. There it is. It does work. Hi, Captain.
Hi, George.
I'm going to cover, it's been a while since you've been on, so we got a lot of things to cover. This one's kind of getting to be old news, but it was very interesting to me. I'm going to show this clip very quickly to get us started here. And I know you've seen this a number of times, but, and so probably has the audience, but here. Very long, but it gets the main idea across. And, people like myself looked at that initially and thought, well, hell, that plane just fell out of the sky. How could that possibly happen? But I got a feeling the first time that you saw that, you probably had a pretty good idea of what was happening there.
Yeah, the flight path was consistent with an aerodynamic stall and the way the airplane fell off on the wing. And so I didn't know what led to the stall, but I could tell that there was a loss of control by the pilots due to aerodynamic stall.
Let me bring this up because they're thinking now they maybe have figured this out. I don't know if it's final yet, but it may be as final as we're going to get. This is off the gate-checked website. The crashed Yeti aircraft propellers were accidentally feathered. What? Yeah, and I've got this illustration of this photo of what these controls look like. And I've also got another clip here. I'll play this too, and this will show you what we're talking about. And I may show this again because it doesn't last but a few seconds, but I mean, it really gets to the heart of this. Okay, so Captain, that's, that video there's pretty telling. Those are the center levers are called condition levers, and then that other lever on the right is the flap lever. Tell us what they think happened here.
It gets into human perception and biases, and what inadvertently, unintentionally, obviously, the non-flying pilot that was in the right seat, that, as I understand, was an instructor, incorrectly got the propeller levers instead of the flap lever. And when they pulled it, then when the props went into feather, the airplane lost thrust, and the flying pilot was put in a really difficult position of trying to maintain control of the airplane as it was decelerating because it no longer had power on it. And they stalled it and killed everybody on the airplane. The, the, to move a condition lever instead of a flap lever is almost unbelievable. But clearly, the pilot that moved it didn't intend to. But to make an error like that, George, it's really hard for me to understand it.
Yeah, and it's particularly terrifying for any passenger because again, this is something that should not happen. I mean, this is a 1 in a million shot on the losing side. I mean, this is a really spectacular fail. And I guess a couple of things here for myself included, people that don't truly understand. Scott, I used to watch 12 O'Clock High when I was a kid, and they talk about feathering engines and props. I just thought it meant shutting an engine down, but
No.
feathering means you're changing the angle of the propellers or something like that. Explain that.
If you shut the engine down on a propeller airplane, the propeller will still windmill because of the airflow, and that's a huge amount of drag. So what ends up happening is that there's a device in the hub of the propeller that will turn the blade vertically so that it no longer turns and has the drag of a disc, but just the small increments of the propeller blade width. So it reduces the drag tremendously. So all twin engine airplanes have the capability of feathering the propeller in the event of an engine failure or loss of power. So it's a critical safety feature to have on the airplane, but it has to be used appropriately. And I flew turboprops for a very long period of time, probably 12 or 13, no, probably closer to 15 years. And that it just you just didn't confuse a flap lever and a condition lever. It just didn't happen. So I don't understand, and I'm not sure we'll ever know because the crew is going to recognize what has happened, that they have lost thrust out of the engines, out of the propeller, but they don't have time to fix it. So it's one of those cases where just a misunderstanding. But to put in context, and this is important, out of all the thousands, millions, and millions of flight hours, this is somewhat of a one off. I don't know of another case where people have pulled back both condition levers. There have been cases where there have been misidentified engines that have failed and people have acted inappropriately. There was an error. It was in Taiwan. It was an ATR 72, I think, that they basically pulled the wrong engine back. But that's a little bit different. But one like this, it almost is a one-off, George.
Yeah, and I bring this back up on screen because there's a couple of things here that I find. These condition levers. Okay, as I understand it, in flight, I mean, you might, hopefully, you don't have to feather engines, but it's very rare that you would use these in flight. These things are not to be pulled or during flight at all, right? These are something that they use at the gate once in a while or something like that. How the hell? I mean, it's just amazing to me that this guy could pull those levers.
Well, it is on this airplane, I'd have to go back and check, but moving condition levers is not uncommon, and that is it sets the RPM of the engine. So once you take off, you reduce the RPM, it lowers the noise level during climb, and then again potentially in cruise. So you do move them, and then of course every time you shut the engine down as well. So you do use those. And then they're also, they have a feather position in the event of an engine failure or engine loss. So there's that. But you use them, but you use them at the appropriate time.
Yeah. And I've got this graphic up now for people that are listening in audio. They won't be able to see this, but I've got an arrow indicating these little levers underneath the main lever there. They have to be pulled up, and this has to be pulled down into the feather condition. The one thing that is kind of similar here, again, this is a major brain outage, but you pull this thing down to the feather condition. It's somewhat similar when it's down there to the 30 flaps condition over here on the right. So the levers were pulled about to the same area. And let me bring this, play this again just because I have it so that you can see. Here's the control lever. This is what he wasn't supposed to do and did. And then following, that's what he was supposed to do. And instead, they found that the flaps hadn't been pulled down at all.
Right.
And they found that condition lever in the feathered position. Wow.
Yeah, it's when you pull those triggers, and they're set up specifically to guard against this. When you pull those two triggers, then you can go into feather. The way that's designed is are you sure you want to do this? It takes two
Yes.
actions. You have to retard the levers back to feather, but to get through the gate, you have to pull those triggers up.
And there's so many peculiarities with this. For one thing, the guy that did this, he wasn't the rookie, as I understand it. This was the Czech pilot. This was the experienced hand at the controls that was
Right.
kind of checking out the pilot in the left seat. And I guess my question for you is, regardless of experience or being this person being a Czech pilot, you've been a Czech. Have you ever seen anybody do anything like this or almost do something like this in your career? Because you flew a lot of hours.
I have seen people misidentify engines that have failed or were having difficulties. But as far as if you move a lever or anything in an airplane that is not reversible, you tend to want to check that with the other pilot. And that comes down to if you fail the left engine, as an example, before you start shutting the fuel off and things like that, you confirm with the other pilot, okay, I've got the left engine power lever. We're going to reduce it to idle. Yep, I agree with that. Okay, now we've got the fuel cutoff lever for the left engine. That's the one we agree is the problem engine. Yes, okay, and then you shut it down. So there's a check and balance that goes on here that didn't happen with this in the accident airplane, and so it tells me that it was unintended. That action was unintended by the instructor pilot that was in the right-hand seat.
Wow. Well, we got a lot of things to cover with the captain, so I can't spend much more time on this. One question I had, now you've talked before about how these tragedies occur and there's very little silver lining, but if there is one, it's that corrections are made, things are fixed. There's something done to prevent this from happening in the future. Is there anything that can be done to prevent this from happening again?
I mean, certainly everybody that operates this airplane will get a service bulletin that says, hey, we've had this occur where a pilot inadvertently pulled the condition levers into feather. Be aware, don't do that. So there'll be a reminder, there'll be an emphasis in training to make sure that your hand is on the flap lever, and that it will serve as a good reminder to the crews operating the airplanes.
Okay, great. Let's move along here. And I thought a good introduction to, this trifecta of issues that we're talking about today would be to show a clip that Tom Ferguson, and Captain probably knows him. He's a reporter for aviation stuff on CNN. Let's take a look at this clip, and then this will be our jumping off point to talk about this. Here it is.
In Boston, a trifecta of trouble. Federal authorities say a man attempted to open an exit door on a United jet coming from Los Angeles and allegedly tried to stab a flight attendant with a broken spoon before being tackled by other passengers. On the ground, two departing passenger planes collided as one of them was pushed back from its gate, and all of that is just a week after a near collision there between two other jets. One, a private Learjet taking off, the other, a commercial jet landing. Aviation analysts say airports are struggling with this rash of hits and near collisions.
Okay, Captain. So there's a lot of things there. Let's start with the first one here. Again, something that we've talked about a lot, this unruly passenger situation. This goes beyond unruly. This is a crazy train on a plane. What, if anything, this guy trying to attack a stewardess or somebody with a spoon, what can be done to fix or prevent this? It seems like we're seeing more of these types of incidents. What do you recommend at this juncture?
Well, I think that we've seen a decrease since the mask issues have abated to some degree. Ones like this are very serious. This individual needs to be charged and, if when found guilty, sentenced significant to a significant amount of time. This is a threat to not only the flight attendant, but to everybody on board. And it needs to be taken by the judicial system, our court system, as extremely serious. And it's a federal crime. It needs to be dealt with by the FBI, by all the federal authorities. And that is probably one of our best ways is people know that if they attempt to threaten the safety of the airplane, that the consequences are going to be quite severe. And I totally support that. It is unfortunately very necessary to protect the traveling public, all our passengers. So that's one. Two, in the post 9/11 world, it has been clearly shown that all of us on board have a responsibility for the security of the airplane. And if somebody poses a threat, and the crew asks for assistance, you've got to be willing to do that. And it's in everybody's common interest. The flight crew will not come out. They're going to stay behind locked doors to ensure that the control of the airplane remains under the appropriate people, the pilots. So, but they'll be diverting into the nearest suitable airport, and that can happen pretty quickly. So, when you have someone on board that poses a threat, we've got to meet that threat.
And I got to let my angry old man out a little bit, stay off of my grass moment here. Actually, this was brought up by my wife also. This particular incident, this guy that had the sharpened spoon that was trying to kill people on the plane. I mean, he, if you look at him, again, I'm from the hippie generation, folks. So, I mean, I take umbrage to people, judging others on the fact that they have long hair or beard or something like this. But this guy didn't look like your typical air traveler from our era anyway, Captain. I mean, the guy had a full beard. He had on camo khakis and that type of thing. What about pre-screening people a little bit more? Somebody that wants to get on a plane, for instance, wearing military type outerwear, wearing camouflage. I mean, we're not going duck hunting here, folks. I mean, what's the point of that? Just to have a conversation with these people. I mean, can that be done? Have you ever recommended that in the safety analysis type stuff?
I have not, for the reason that we carry people from all over the world. We carry the demographics that get on the airplanes, and I don't think we can, and I would not support prejudging based on appearance. And I think that I've got friends that have had that happen to them, and it's fundamentally wrong that they were judged because of their ethnicity, where they were from, their accent, whatever. So I think that everyone goes through the same pre-screening. It's proven to be pretty effective throughout. And now, if somebody starts making comments about the airplane or their displeasure with the airline or anything, even in the veiled threat category, now that becomes a different issue. That separates you from the traditional passenger, and that would probably warrant a little bit, certainly a greater degree of scrutiny. Once they're on the airplane, flight attendants are trained in how to deal with unruly passengers. That is, since 9/11, that training has increased significantly. And the willingness of passengers to intervene physically if necessary, if asked by the crew, that has risen significantly. So there are different assets, but to pre-screen somebody, George, I think you open you open a lot more problems for people than potentially that the risk justifies.
And I'm sympathetic to that. Like I said, I mean, that profiling is a bad thing. But I guess if you're unclean, unshaven, and you look like you just crawled out from under a log someplace, I don't know. Maybe somebody could talk to you. But how about this angle? Now, I knew that you were coming on the show, and I promoted that you were coming on the show, and I got a text from a viewer that asked about someone in that flight crew having a stun gun if something really gets hairy back there, and you go back there and use it. You can't use a gun, obviously. You shoot a hole in the plane, you're all going to die, maybe. But what about? Have you ever heard any talk about that?
There has been a variety of discussions about different possibilities. Each of them come with positives and negatives. One of the things that comes up is if they take that stun gun away from you, now what happens? And you can have that reversed on you. What I would suggest is taking the recommendations and advice of security experts, both within the Homeland Security Administration, within FAA, within FBI. These are law enforcement professionals that deal with these sorts of people every day. They've got a lot more experience about what works and what doesn't. And anytime we come up on very complex social questions like this, I think that turning to the experts is probably the best way to go.
And what about air marshals? I had a question posed about this as well. One of the things about the marshals, you're not supposed to, I think, even know that they're on the plane. They are on planes. What about just increasing the number of them? And then there's a cost associated with everything. What's the discussion on that?
The number of air marshals is relatively static, and they they have a profile that they use for higher risk flights, and so those are the ones that they're aware that in which the marshals will show up more frequently. The flight crew knows if there are air marshals on board. Other people usually don't. If there are other armed individuals on board, they are told that where the air marshals are and so forth. All of anybody that's armed on the airplane knows where everybody else that's armed is, and that's part of the security briefing that goes on. So, could an increase in air marshals help? Possibly, but it's a very high cost item. These are highly trained individuals, and I mean, we need to think long and hard about it. What we're finding is that even with the threats that go on today, the flight crews are dealing with them pretty effectively. And even in this case, the passengers, the crew asked for help from the passengers. They got it. They secured the individual up to the point where the airplane landed. So this situation, as critical as it was, and I'm not downplaying it, but it had a successful conclusion because of the training and the professionalism of the flight crew, in addition to the willingness of the passengers to help as requested by the flight attendants.
Yeah, I got to thinking about the assets, the things we were going to talk about on this show. Folks, I can make myself laugh at times. I thought, the pre-flight video that they show a lot of times when they show you how to fasten your seatbelt or whatever. Maybe they should put a little demonstration on there of what happens if you act up about getting wrestled to the floor by an air marshal, or in the instance of the stun gun, which they're not going to show what somebody looks like if they've been hit with a stun gun.
Yeah.
That might deter some people acting out on airplanes, but that's more comedy than reality. Now, the other thing Tom Ferguson talked about in that report that I did want to have you comment on are these near misses. And thank God they're near misses, but we have had collisions before, on the ground and in the air. Is there more of this now, or is this just a coincidence, do you think?
I think that we've seen an uptick in the first part of this year with airliner involved runway incursions. That said, understand that things have worked actually as intended, and the Boston example is one where there's a landing JetBlue airliner that aborts the landing, goes around exactly as they should have. A go around is a maneuver that pilots practice a lot, so it's not. It may be scary
In Boston,
but it's I won't call it a routine maneuver, but it's something that we do a lot. consequently, if there's an obstruction or an airplane moving inappropriately, okay, we're going around, no big deal. And you train for it. The words "go around," it triggers a specific sequence of events for both pilots. So um, I I didn't feel as though that there was an imminent collision in Boston. Um, the airplane that took off without a clearance, they need to understand where that miscommunication occurred, and that's true of the JFK American airplane that taxied onto the runway of a departing Delta airplane. When there's a miscommunication about a clearance, that is something that is an ongoing challenge for pilots. You hear a lot of clearances during the course of the day. Some of them come at a very rapid pace, but you have to know, understand, and execute that clearance. And the separation uh, between airplanes depends on that. So that's the only, basically common fact that we've seen between the runway incursion in Honolulu, in JFK, and in Boston were clearances that were misunderstood and not properly followed. The one in Austin, Texas, that one was pretty serious. The question now arises, why was the Southwest crew cleared onto the runway? And that may very well come back to the air traffic controller.
Okay, and moving along here, the next thing, again, we have talked about this before, but these incidents of severe turbulence, and one of them was fatal. I've got a couple of clips here. Let's play this one.
Last week, a Lufthansa plane carrying, among others, actor Matthew McConaughey and his wife Camilla ran into severe turbulence. She posted, "I was told the plane dropped almost 4,000 feet. 7 people went to the hospital." A different passenger told Aaron for Out Front,
Suddenly, there was just like this big drop, and everything just flew everywhere, and it was a huge mess. And I saw the attendant on my right basically hit the ceiling and was completely horizontal.
Again, you could put that in a pre-flight video, because people are encouraged to leave their seatbelts fastened. Of course, the staff has to move around in the plane, but my God, can you imagine seeing the stewardess on the ceiling, pinned to the ceiling because of turbulence? But that's what can happen. Number one, is there anything that can be done about this, Captain? And number two, are we seeing more turbulence in the skies than we used to?
There are some studies that say that turbulence incidents have gone up, and it's been attributed to global warming. I think that there may be something to that. But one of the things that I noticed earlier in the week before these events occurred, I was seeing on various blogs and things about how fast the jet stream velocities were, and they still actually are even this week, but they've been up about 100 miles an hour faster than normal. And that's a warning signal, because when you have high energy air like that and the airplane passes near it and is not in that same type of air, the place where those two air boundaries collide can be very, very turbulent. It's known as clear air turbulence, and it's oftentimes on the south side of the core of the jet stream. And this is where the Lufthansa airplane encountered it. So the meteorologists have gotten better about being able to forecast the likelihood, but everyone avoids areas where there is forecast severe turbulence. So if this area that was forecast was either north, south, east, or west, but unexpectedly by the meteorologist, that jet stream moves and that area of turbulence moves, you end up with events such as the Lufthansa occurrence. Let me be extremely clear. I probably don't have a stronger recommendation for people to do the same thing I do, that pilots do overall. If you're in your seat, keep your seatbelt at least loosely fastened. If the airplane experiences unexpected turbulence, and if there is a negative G, which is what causes you to come out of your seat, condition, this will keep you from hitting the ceiling. This will keep you from being put in a position that you're scrambling trying to avoid injury, because when you come down, that's when things get broken: arms, legs, feet, all of those things. And this is where the flight attendants have got a real problem, because once they go up, they have to find a way to come back to the floor safely without injury, and they don't have a lot of time to do that. And this is why that I was always tried to be extremely protective of my flight crew. And if I even thought that there was a likelihood of greater than moderate turbulence, I asked them to remain seated. And this is typical. But from a passenger standpoint, please, if you're in your seat, keep your seatbelt at least just loosely fastened, and it's the greatest thing you can do to avoid injury.
Yeah, there's a couple of things about that. Now, when I was flying a lot for business, I would keep mine fastened firm, tightly around me, and I didn't even take coffee or anything like that. And I didn't want to be wearing it. I was dressed for business, So I was amazed. You take off, and 10 minutes later, well, you can move freely about the cabin. We recommend. I'm like, oh, why does anybody have to? We've only been in the air 10 minutes. Why would you have to jump up and move around the plane? But people feel compelled to do that. The other thing that was interesting about that clip, Matthew McConaughey and his wife. I mean, that's Americana there. They got the quote from them, and that's a big part of that story. But I'm like, well, why are they any more important than me if I'm flying next to them? When you were a captain, when you were flying, did they tell you that you had celebrities back there? Did that make any difference to anybody?
We oftentimes knew that we had celebrities on board, because of the notoriety. Sometimes they'll get boarded through an alternative means from the outside of the jetway or something like that. Um, eh, so we knew oftentimes we had them on board, but we would treat them like any other guest, any other passenger.
Yeah, and on turbulence, before we leave that, we've talked about how bad it can be, and you can get hurt. You can get killed, too. Here's a clip. Watch this.
And in yet another case of violent turbulence, a private jet over New England was hit so hard, one of the three passengers, a woman from Maryland, died.
Only information I have about the emergency is possible laceration requesting medical assistance on the runway.
The National Transportation Safety Board says moments before the turbulence, that plane also experienced a problem with its trim control.
They were in the process of diagnosing that when they received a momentary in-flight upset. And so this is something we are investigating.
Yeah, a couple of things there. That's a private jet. That was a government official, somebody that was fairly well known.
Former government
Okay,
official.
that
An
had
attorney.
died tragically in that. A lot of people think when you're, not flying commercial, when you're flying corporate, some of the rules come off. You don't have to worry about these types of things on a Learjet or a private jet, but turbulence can be just as bad on one of those as a major jetliner, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it can in some cases be worse because the airplanes are smaller. And then so the forces to move that mass around are actually lower than they would be to move an airliner around. So same thing applies. If you're in your seat, keep your seatbelt at least loosely fastened.
Wow. I've got one more clip here.
An engine bursting into flames, smoke filling the cabin, and an emergency landing. It was all alarming to passengers on this Southwest flight from Cuba to Florida, which the airline says had to turn back after hitting birds.
We just feel the explosion, a lot of smoke. People were screaming, not knowing what to do, and we kept trying to breathe, and it was filling up with more smoke, and it was very acidy.
Yeah, so birds, I can't see that without thinking of Sully, of course, but these Canadian geese or these birds or whatever it is that you get into a migratory pattern, it can do this, and the consequences can be severe. I was kind of surprised that they were talking about the cabin filling up with smoke. Is that what it is? Jet smoke, like exhaust smoke that they've got in there? No.
It's entirely different. That is likely due to one of two things, and the more likely being that it caused engine oil to be sucked into the air conditioning system, and after it had been heated. So that's the smoke that you're getting, and it's unusual, but not unprecedented. Depending on the damage the birds do to the core of the engine, it can cause an imbalance, and that can cause bearings to start leaking oil. And once you do that and you with highly compressed air, which is very hot, you end up basically getting that oil type smoke, which is my guess as to what they smelled, and the amount of smoke that they had. For those engines, this was a whole lot of smoke. This was an unusual event. The type of engines that they have generally are pretty bird tolerant, and they'll generally throw the birds into the outer duct, not the core. In this case, they ended up in the core. Sadly, one of the things that we're seeing more frequently are bird strikes. The number of birds, particularly like Canadian geese and so forth, because of the lack of predators around, the number of those are going up dramatically. So we're seeing a greater number of even of larger birds, and when they do hit an engine, they cause a lot of damage. So was the airplane in danger? No, it's an engine failure. The crew handled it appropriately. The amount of smoke that they had in the cabin, highly unusual, and they did the right thing. They got it on the ground, they got it stopped, and they got everybody out of the airplane.
I was interested in seeing that video very quickly. The air masks, were they dropped by the crew, or those are come down because of air pressure or something, don't
Right.
they? Yeah. How do they get those down? Yeah.
You know, I'm not exactly sure how they got those down. It could, was it a very firm landing? I've seen them knocked down because of that.
Mm.
Or did the crew, manually switch the oxygen on? That's a possibility as well. So I think that's one of the things the investigators will look at.
Okay, let's move along here because we got to get these on before the captain has to depart. We haven't had him on for quite a while, and I wanted to talk about this one. The FAA is reviewing a United aircraft safety incident in Hawaii. This is from Flight Global. The Federal Aviation Administration says it has reviewed an aircraft safety incident from December in which a United Airlines aircraft reportedly descended sharply just after takeoff from Hawaii. Now, this is interesting, folks. According to flight tracking website flatradar24.com, United Flight 1722 departed on the island of Maui, normally on the 18th of December, until 71 seconds after takeoff, when the aircraft entered a steep dive. It was tracked as descending from 2,200 feet above the Pacific Ocean to just 775 feet, folks, before recovering and continuing its flight to San Francisco. Both the FAA and United Airlines were kind of tight-lipped about this event. The United Airlines flight crew reported the incident to the FAA as part of a voluntary safety reporting program, the U.S. aviation regulator said on 13 February. The agency reviewed the incident and took appropriate action. Now, the FAA did not answer a follow-up query regarding what appropriate action was taken. United Airlines, meantime, says the issue prompted pilot training. And here we've got a graphic, and for folks that are watching video, take a look at this because it's an excellent depiction of what happened. The flight track of a United Airlines Boeing 777, which took off in Maui in Hawaii on 18 December 2022, bound for San Francisco. And you can see this dive that occurred here. So I don't know. When I got this article, there wasn't much known about this, Captain. I kind of thought maybe they screwed up the automation somehow, and this again was flying by automation instead of by hand. Maybe that was, I don't know. What's your opinion of this?
Well, I looked at this pretty carefully, and what's consistent with is the airplane is heavily loaded. It's full. In addition, it's got well over 100,000 pounds worth of fuel on board to go to San Francisco. Consequently, the flap retraction speeds are fairly high, and this happens when they would have been reducing the flaps to configure the wing for high-speed flight. And if they were a condition where the flaps were retracted early, most importantly, the slats on the front part of the wing, if that was inadvertently done early, then you could end up with a condition that could trigger the stall warning system known as a stick shaker. And the appropriate reaction is to shove the nose over to make sure that you don't get an aerodynamic stall. And at that point, and you look up and you realize that you're pointed at the Pacific Ocean, then you end up pulling back, the airplane accelerated very rapidly during this dive. It picked up a little better than 60 knots. And so it's consistent with that. And I know that that's one of the scenarios that the investigators are looking at. The airplane went to San Francisco, did not require any additional maintenance. So I think that the crew understood what happened. They felt as though because they understood it, they were safe to continue on to San Francisco. They reported it appropriately, and any of the training issues that were accomplished. I think that this is a scenario. The automation itself doesn't look like it's a player, because if you look at the air traffic control tapes, they had just been cleared to a waypoint that was along their route of flight. So the automation wouldn't have been doing anything major with the pitch of the airplane at that point. So I think that the investigators are going to look at, and they even said, NTSB said that they were looking at the flap retraction schedule or the timing of it. So I think that that's an area that will get a good bit more scrutiny.
Well, in that Hawaii incident, I don't know if it resulted in anybody being on the ceiling, but it would get your attention as a passenger. I told that cost you $10 at the state fair, folks. That's a major roller coaster there, and it's unusual, thankfully. Now will there be a formal conclusion on this type of thing, or is this just going to be the end of it? Do you think?
I think that there'll be at least an initial or interim report from NTSB. And usually they will issue a final report. Whether this will merit that or not, I think we'll have to wait and see. One good thing, though, in here, George, this was right after takeoff. Everybody had their seatbelt fastened.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, good. Well, like they say, if it bleeds, it leads, and that's true with aviation news too. I often say if it scares, it airs. So, I mean, we get a lot of this type of coverage when something goes wrong. Again, you have all kinds of flights, of millions of them or whatever, that don't go wrong. Let's take a look at this. The IATA releases a 2022 airline safety performance. So I went to your website, and I know that you kind of partner with these folks. You follow them, Captain, and they tell us that in 2022, there were 5 fatal accidents involving loss of life to passengers and crew. It's reduced from 7 in 2021, and an improvement on the 5-year average, which was also 7. The fatal accident rate improved to 0.16 per million sectors for 2022 from 0.27 per million sectors in 2021, and was ahead of the 5-year fatal accident rate of 0.20. Now, the all accident rate was 1.21 per million, a reduction compared to the rate of 1.26 accidents for the 5 years, 2018 to 2022, but an increase compared to 1.13 accidents per million sectors in 2021. Again, we're talking very small amounts here. The fatality risk declined 0.11 from 0.23 in 2021 and 0.13 for the 5 years, 2018 to 2022. IATA member airlines experienced 1 fatal accident in 2022 with 19 fatalities. And I would imagine most of the major airlines in the U.S. are members of IATA, Captain?
Most are, yes. The significance, I think, here is in 2 places. One, that 4 of the 5 accidents were regional aircraft operating in challenging areas. There was only 1 jet airliner accident, and it accounted for the majority of the fatalities. And that was I think it was China Eastern airplane, but it was aircraft in China early in 22. So what we're seeing, I think, is a continuation of the improvement in aviation safety overall. It's still remarkable to me that over like the last 5 to 10 years, we've had about a 40+% improvement in aviation safety, and it was already very, very, very good. So there's a lot of effort on part of a whole lot of people that go into the continuing improvement in the safety of aviation. It's the safest form of transportation ever designed by humankind, and it continues to get better. As good as we are today, it's not good enough for tomorrow. So we're on the journey of continuous improvement, and I think the IATA data proves that, and it proves the dedication of the airlines, of the regulators, of the professionals that fly the airplanes, maintain the airplanes, dispatch the airplanes, and serve as flight attendants on the airplanes. You put those professionals together, you give them good airplanes, you give them good training, and you get these very, very, very safe operations.
Yeah, safe operation doesn't get people to watch. Here's the graphic that I used to get people to tune in with the captains. Passengers berserk, near misses, killer turbulence. Yeah, well, that makes people watch, and that's why I used that promo. Let me bring this up on screen because we're going to run out of time, but I wanted to get to this. The NTSB is calling for safety cameras, data recorders, and eVTOL aircraft. So I thought, what is that? Well, okay, people may have seen this on 60 Minutes. Let me see if I can get this to come on here. Do I have that clip still? Where are you, Evo? Yeah, here it is. Watch this, and it'll show what we're talking about. Again, there's no audio with this. I took it out. It was Anderson Cooper there. I talk about him on my show a lot. He's a Vanderbilt. He's a former CIA intern. But anyway, here they're showing these planes, these battery operated contraptions, and captains talked about battery coming in as a fuel source for these planes. It looks like a big old drone, Captain. I mean, are these things becoming reality, or are these going to be on the drawing board for some time yet, do you think?
No, they're very much becoming reality. I think that we're seeing them fly now in a test and in the early stages of certification. We're seeing the FAA struggling a little bit with the certification standards. How do you certify them as a helicopter, as an airplane, as a hybrid between the two, or something altogether yet different? And those questions are still out there. But I think within the next couple of years, you'll see these begin to show up. In what capacity, that remains to be seen. Are they going to be privately owned? Where are they going to land? What's the insurance ramifications of these off airport landings potentially? Or are they going to build these vertical, VTOL airstrips or small areas in cities? I mean, for example, New York City has a prohibition against helicopter operations over the city, other than law enforcement. And so, how is all this going to work? So this is all new ground. This is all new questions, and the industry wants to push forward with this technology. The regulators are trying to ensure safety, and it's emerging technology. What is it that we don't know about this type of flight yet? And there's a push to try to make them as automated as possible with as few pilots as possible. So all of these complex issues have to be sorted through before you're going to see the sky full of these things over every city in the country.
And let's bring this up on screen. The great Mary Knox from Facebook says, we saw the first take off of a hydrogen-powered plane. What's the future for that? What are you hearing about hydrogen power?
Interestingly, Airbus is doing a lot of research for it. There are some great benefits to hydrogen. The storage capability is a real challenge. So if you can liquefy hydrogen, storage becomes less of a problem, but you've got to keep this at extremely, extremely cold temperatures, like minus 400 degrees. So the idea of using hydrogen through a fuel cell or the production of hydrogen on board the aircraft, something like that, are definitely things that we need to explore. It is a virtually limitless fuel source, and it has virtually no emission issues that fossil fuels have. So it's a very desirable fuel, but the infrastructure to support it and the onboard storage makes it challenging. But a number of companies, Airbus being notably one of them, is putting a lot of time, effort, and money into trying to research the best option to see if hydrogen is a viable fuel source.
Always neat to look into the future. And this is Friday when we're airing this. I wanted to have Captain Cox on earlier in the week, but he was doing a trade show. He was checking out the industry of helicopters. Let me bring this on screen. This will play, Captain. You'll be able to talk over this, I think, and kind of talk us through what we're seeing here. So these are landing at the trade show, the different types of helicopters.
There was an enormous number of helicopters there this year. I think in the post-COVID world, there was such a pent-up demand for for this trade show that it was hot. There were a lot of people there, meaning thousands of people there. New helicopters, the different use helicopters, aerial firefighting, executive transportation, just all different kinds of new equipment, of vendors showing their wares to a very interested audience. There were extremely good presentations on safety, on operations, on how helicopters can be more neighborly, and operate safely in conjunction with neighborhoods. So the Helicopter Association International, they have done a remarkable job of trying to reach out to the public and say, look, we want to be good neighbors. We want to work together to have the advantages that rotorcraft bring to society, but do it in a responsible way.
And I had, let me see here if I can even find it. So there's one here that kind of gets into the area of like personal transportation. Very small helicopters that look like you could launch one from your backyard, basically. Is there a move towards, you know, everyday people owning a helicopter to get around? Is that still jets and stuff? Is that still somewhere in the future?
I mean, I think that there will be some personal transportation helicopters, but helicopters require a pretty high level of skill to fly them. They're not aerodynamically stable like a helicopter, or I'm sorry, like an airplane. So they require quite a bit of skill to and education to understand all of the aerodynamics that are in play. They're very complicated. They're very high maintenance. They do remarkable things. The vertical flight capability of helicopters and what they can do uh, never ceases to amaze me. But uh, you have that much machinery moving in that many different directions. Uh, it requires a lot of maintenance and it requires a lot of skill to fly.
Did I hear you say once on an earlier show that you have you flown one? The
I have
helicopters?
flown a number of helicopters.
Have
I'm
you?
not rated in them, but I've had the opportunity to fly several different types.
If you want to see some stuff that's funny, I mean, they even have strings of jokes between, fixed wing pilots and, denigrating helicopters and that type of thing.
Oh,
I've heard you say before, though, that where they're needed, they're perfect, but they're never going to reverse or replace. You're never going to go across the country in a helicopter as opposed to a jetliner, I don't think, are you?
no, there
Yeah.
is a very good-natured rivalry between
Yeah.
helicopter pilots and fixed-wing pilots that it has gone on since the beginning of aviation, both rotary and fixed-wing. And it's a good, healthy rivalry. But helicopters do unbelievable things as far as being able to hover, being able to slow fly, being able to get in and out of restricted areas, to emergency medical, aerial firefighting, all of those things they do really well. Are they going to do jet airliner speeds? No, the aerodynamics say not. So I don't think that you're going to see a 400 passenger helicopter anywhere in the near future. So I think that aviation has proven that there is a need and certainly a market for both types of fixed wing and rotorcraft.
Okay, we're just about out of time. I guess we're about ready to leave it there. The one thing I did want to mention, air safety. I think they're going to have a congressional hearing or something. The FAA is doing some work. What's going on with air safety there?
Uh, the acting FAA administrator, Captain Nolan, has called for a safety day, a safety conference. And it's to bring leaders in to say, okay, we've had some pretty high profile events this year. Uh, is there anything we as the industry overall need to be doing to minimize the likelihood of these types of occurrences, and to learn as much as we can from them, and going forward to reduce the number.
All right, great. And as is sometimes the case, we're starting to get a little choppiness in our interconnectivity here on the internet. So it's a good time to leave. I'll give you a last word, though, because you're so good to come on here. Anything that I've asked about that you'd like to reinforce, or anything you'd like to leave us with before we come back and visit again in maybe a couple, 3 weeks?
At the risk of being repetitive, I think the thing that I would say is, when you're in your seat on an airliner, keep your seatbelt loosely fastened. Um, you prevent injury to yourself. You prevent you from potentially being a flying object and injuring others. So it is the most important thing passengers can do to prevent injury to themselves and others. And I'll leave it
Yeah.
at that.
And again, emphasizing what we were talking about, you could find yourself on the ceiling, folks. We're not talking about a jiggle or an inconvenience here. You might even find yourself like that unfortunate, tragic incident with that woman. It can kill people.
Yes.
So it's well worth it. Whatever inconvenience there is with fastening a seatbelt, do it and keep it there. That's great. Captain, we'll circle back here. We'll come back again in a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and I'm sure there'll be more aviation news. I just love this stuff. Thanks again for coming on Podcast by George.
My pleasure, George. Good to see you.
Yeah, it really does. It's great to see the captain always on Podcast by George. And folks, I'll leave it here. I tell people, if you like seeing Captain Cox and this insight, and if you like aviation, we do it every once in a while. Sign up. Go to podcastbygeorge.com. You can get on the YouTube or Facebook channels by going to podcastbygeorge.com. And you can also sign up for the audio only shows. The audio stripped out of these, and they go on as audio podcasts, and you can listen and re-listen to them on iTunes, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Deezer, Stitcher, all those kinds of places. But that is going to do it, folks. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.